Good morning, everyone. Excellencies and distinguished representatives, welcome to this briefing session hosted by the United Nations Environment Program on the resolution on mineral resource governance. As you are well aware, this resolution was adopted in March 2019 during the fourth session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, UNEA by its acronym in English. Today's briefing session will have presentations in English and Spanish, and this session is being interpreted into English and Spanish. If you want to use Spanish interpretation,
my presentation in your own language, tienen que elegir
you need to choose the language of your preference. There is a button on the lower right hand corner where you can choose the language of your preference. Thank you very much. Before we get started, I would like to thank you for joining us today in this briefing session. On behalf of all the colleagues from the United Nations Environment Program, I would like to welcome all of you. My name is Francesco Gaetani. I am the Regional Coordinator for Environment Under Review in the Latin America and Caribbean Regional Office of the United Nations Environment Program, based in Panama. I am pleased to be the regional focal point for the implementation of this resolution. In this particular capacity, I will be facilitating this briefing today. As you received in the conceptual note that it was sent to you a couple of weeks ago, today's session is a briefing session on the consultation process at a sub-regional and regional level. UNEP is convening a series of virtual consultations at multiple scales, sub-regional, regional, and global. In UNEP's 6 different regions, the same virtual consultations are taking place from July to September of this year. It should be noted that by the end of 2020, we will have a global forum where all the regions, the 6 regions of UNEP, will be brought together to be updated on the next steps as we prepare for the 5th session of the Environment Assembly, which will take place hopefully from the 22nd through the 26th of February 2021. During today's session, we will provide a briefing. We will provide you with information to update member states on the sub-regional and regional consultation process and the implementation of the resolution. Let me bring to your attention that this briefing has been organized jointly with our technical partners working on the implementation of the resolution, specifically with the University of Queensland's Sustainable Minerals Institute from Australia. And our technical partners are joining us in this virtual session, of course. We are also grateful for the generous support of the government of Switzerland's Federal Office of the Environment to implement this resolution, and the government of the United Mexican States, who sponsored this resolution during UNEA's assembly in March 2019. Through this briefing, we will use the term Environment Assembly, or UNEA4 or UNEA, to refer to UNEP's decision-making body on the environment. This is just a point of clarification. We're going to be using UNEA's acronym, the Environment Assembly, by the United Nations, to be clear in our presentations. We are organizing this virtual session and for the world, in the whole world in general, and for Latin America and the Caribbean. We are all fighting in different functions and using different tools against the social and environmental effects of a very dangerous and large pandemic. We acknowledge the situation in Latin America and the Caribbean. We acknowledge the effects of COVID-19, and we acknowledge that the pandemic is a worldwide crisis, which is resulting in significant and far-reaching socioeconomic impacts. At UNEP, we remain deeply committed to our core mandate of facilitating global environmental governance by adopting virtual channels to hold discussions. Today's session is an example. UNEP, on top of that, is committed to working with governments to sustainably recover and build resilience to future crises due to emerging diseases and zoonoses, as it is the case of COVID-19. The implementation of this resolution on sustainable mineral governance, in our opinion, can contribute to recovery processes after COVID-19. And we hope that all countries in the region can move into the recovery process. Very well, before we get started with our session and before we move into our presentations, I would like to acknowledge a few persons who helped very actively the organization of this virtual meeting and many other meetings, and who are also working in the implementation of this resolution. Firstly, as mentioned, I would like to thank the governments of Switzerland and Mexico. In spite of the hardship that we have gone through, they are here joining us. We have Laura Plachkov and Gabriela Milan, respectively. Within the UN Environment Program, I am pleased to acknowledge Leo Heilemann, the Regional Director for the Latin America and the Caribbean's Office, Ligia Noronha, the Director of UNEP's Economy Division, Elisa Tonda, the Head of the Consumption and Production Unit in UNEP's Economy Division, and Angela Kariuki, the Legal Officer in UNEP's Law Division. This group of people was key for the implementation of this resolution. And this group is at your disposal to receive input and feedback from you for the implementation of this resolution. It is worthwhile mentioning to thank the work done by our technical partners, specifically Professor Daniel Franks, who is the program leader of the Governance and Leadership in Mining at the Sustainable Minerals Institute in the University of Queensland in Australia, and Julia Keenan, a research fellow at the Center for Responsibility in Mining at the University of Queensland. Very well. Before I give the floor to the director of UNEP's office to address us with some introductory remarks in our first briefing. I would like to provide an overview of this briefing session and the scope of the underlying goal of this briefing session. First and foremost, we would hear from Leo Heilemann. Secondly, we will hear from the governments of Mexico and Switzerland on their respective roles. And of course, the interest shown by these two countries in UNEA4 Mineral Resource Governance Resolution. Following these speakers from the proposer states, we will turn to Professor Daniel Franks, who will present a more detailed briefing on the resolution. And this presentation will cover the details of the resolution, and this is specifically the operative paragraph that we're implementing right now. Also, Professor Franks will introduce the functional studies that have informed this process so far. And finally, he will take us through the upcoming consultation process by describing the events, the structure, and the invitations that will form the process for getting us to the global forum. The Q&A session will follow next after we hear from Professor Franks, and during our meeting, the Q&A function will be available to receive your questions. Please send us your questions via the Q&A function. That is to say, please write down your questions, don't turn on your microphone, and please state your question concisely and clearly. We will try to address as many questions as possible. And finally, I will give the floor to my colleague Angela to close the session and provide us with an overview of the feedback options available for all member states and key stakeholders, as well as the platforms to access and share information on this process. Please note that this briefing session is being recorded and it will be made available for all the attendants present right now and who was not able to join us. So we are at your disposal. If you have questions and comments and any other information that you need related to this briefing session, please let us know. Well, without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Leo Heilemann, the Regional Director for the United Nations Environment Program for Latin America and the Caribbean, to deliver an introduction to today's subject matter and some opening remarks on this very important topic, which is mineral resource governance. Mr. Heilemann, please.
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you very much. Dear representatives of the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to really express sincere appreciation for your coming together and participating in this virtual regional consultation on the implementation of the United Nations Environmental Assembly Resolution 416 on mineral resource governance. The United Nations Environmental Assembly is the world's highest level decision-making body on the environment, with a universal membership of all 193 member states. The Assembly meets biannually at the headquarters of the United Nations Environment Program in Nairobi, Kenya, to set priorities for global environmental policies and to develop international environmental law. Through its ministerial declarations and resolutions, the Assembly provides leadership, catalyzes intergovernmental action on the environment, and contributes to the implementation of the United Nations 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. The Assembly is also UNEP's governing body. It has 4 sessions, or has had 4 sessions since 2014. And before that, there was what was called the Governing Council, which gave direction to UNEP in terms of the work that had to be done. And this was comprised of 58 member states. So now there is universal participation under the heading of the United Nations Environment Assembly. The 4th session of the Assembly, or UNEA4, was held in March 2019. And the 5th session, UNEA5, will be held from the 22nd to the 26th of February 2021 under the theme of strengthening actions for nature to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. During UNEA4, member states adopted the UNEA Resolution number 4, Res 19, on mineral resource governance. The resolution recognizes the important contribution of mining towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the dependence of low carbon, clean technologies on metals and minerals. Among other things, it requests UNEP to collect information on sustainable practices, identify knowledge gaps and options for implementation strategies, and undertake an overview of existing assessments of different governance initiatives and approaches on sustainable management of metal and mineral resources. Dear representatives, ladies and gentlemen, mining activity is a fundamental sector for many economies in Latin America and the Caribbean, attracting significant levels of foreign direct investment and constituting important components in export and export earnings. This sector has a demonstrated capacity to not only attract investments, but also producing jobs and wealth. The mining sector in Latin America attracts 30% of the world investment in the mining sector, so it is extremely important. Countries like Peru, Mexico, Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina made the region responsible for more than half of the amount of silver produced worldwide in 2018. Similarly, Peru, Mexico, and Brazil are amongst the global rankings of gold producing nations. And over the last 20 years, 40% of the global lithium supply has come from Chile, and the global demand is expecting to triple within the next 6 years. And there are significant supplies of this metal, not only in Chile, but Argentina and neighboring states, Bolivia, etc. So this sector really makes an important contribution to the gross domestic product of the countries in the region, ranging up to as high as 10% of GDP for countries such as Peru and Chile, 7% in Brazil, just over 4% in Mexico, and 1.5% in Colombia, 1% in Argentina. So clearly mining is really very important sector for the Latin American and Caribbean region. Your participation in these consultations are important and important to assist us to implement the resolution and integrate the outcomes into a report for submission to the United Nations Environment Assembly number 5 in February next year. During the consultations, we are looking to hear your experience, collect your expertise and insight, and obtain your feedback on the governance of the extractive industries. More specifically, and as requested in the UNEA4 resolution, what we will hear from you during the consultations will guide us in the information or identification of best practices and knowledge gaps and in assessment of existing governance options. In the course of these consultations, we will look for your insights and guidance to assess what works and what does not work, and the varying overlapping initiatives and national policies aimed at improving the sustainable management of minerals and metals, to report back on current governance frameworks of key issues, included on mine tailings, sand extraction, conflict minerals, and critical metals, to identify the knowledge gaps on good governance observed in different parts of key mineral value chain, to explore how these gaps can be addressed given the knowledge, implementation capacity, and awareness differentials in different mining geographies, and to explore the kind of institutional and governance frameworks that are best suited to support sustainable development with regards to the sustainable management of minerals and metals across the whole life cycle. The findings from the consultations will feed into the report on the implementation of this resolution, which will be presented at the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly in February 2021 for consideration on any next steps. We very much hope that we can count on your support and encourage you to actively contribute in sharing your insights and experience, which will be fundamental in the implementation of this resolution. And we look forward to a fruitful discussion during today's meeting. Thank you very much, and I wish you all success in these consultations. Over.
Muchas gracias, señor Heilemann, para sus palabras.
Thank you very much for your words, Mr. Heilemann, and for the introduction to today's subject matter. Now, I would like to make a technical announcement because I have received some messages from participants saying that they couldn't hear the presentation of Mr. Heilemann. So they are telling me that in order to get to listen speakers who are speaking a language different than Spanish, you need to choose on the settings button right at the bottom of your screen. On the right-hand side, you will see an icon with a camera. So you need to click on settings and choose the language of your preference, Spanish or English. And you need to accept the message that pops up on Google Chrome or on other browsers that you might have where they are asking for permission to access your camera, your audio and video. So apparently this is connected to the use of automatic interpretation system, which is not automatic because, by the way, there are interpreters who are supporting us with the interpretation. So then, let's move on with today's agenda for this briefing session. Now I will turn over to the two countries who are behind this resolution of UNEA4, the governments from Mexico and Switzerland. First of all, we will listen to the government of Mexico. They prepared a presentation on video.
Dear participants, thank you very much for your interest participating in this session today. We understand this is a difficult time for all countries and partners at a time where priorities are shifting and strategies are being reformed for the future. We highly appreciate your time for joining us today in this briefing on mineral resource governance. Although widely questioned because of its environmental and social impacts, mining is a necessary activity for addressing human needs. With appropriate governance schemes, mining can be a strategical contributor to the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. We must recognize that companies' major purpose is to obtain profits. However, it is merely impossible for companies to remain long-term in the market without two basic conditions: social acceptance and environmental care. These two conditions are more easily achieved when a good governance framework exists. Many cases of mining practices around the world have somewhat failed to shape a complete governance framework, which has led to severe environmental degradation and social unrest. Cost living accidents, water scarcity, cultural depletion, and health problems due to environmental pollution has encouraged social opposition to rise in countries where mining is present. Mining is changing worldwide. Not only the demand for new minerals and some metals has increased, but others are being replaced as part of new demands for the latest technologies and different energy sources. Moreover, traditional rich mineral deposits are increasingly scarce, so wastes are produced in much more significant volumes, and some aggressive substances like acids and cyanide are used more frequently. Artisanal and small-scale mining, usually practiced on unhealthy and risky conditions, represents the only income source for many people and a key activity for the economic development of some regions. Nowadays, there's no place to leave it aside of countries' national policies that support the creation of fair economic and development opportunities for this sector. Countries must be aware of those changes and develop strategies to attend new mining demands and update the policies toward more sustainable practices in this industry. Governments, companies, and society must work to induce mining practices that consider the environment and human well-being at the center of their activities without compromising the economy. Relevant stakeholders in the extractive industry have not only the opportunity, but the responsibility to establish a new framework within mining must be practiced in order to catalyze the economic, social, and environmental improvement needed in the places where it occurs. Mechanisms to identify the existing gaps in mineral governance conditions within countries must be applied to promote any changes needed. Sharing experiences among countries is a good form to implement the lessons learned in policies and strategies as fast as possible and to attend social and environmental demands while protecting the company's economic interests. The Mineral Resource Governance Resolution considers both topics and calls for all relevant parts to get involved according to their responsibilities. Relevant stakeholders related to mining have to work together to enable conditions for the achievement of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. For many countries and local communities, a good governance and policies related to the mining sector need to be redesigned as an important way to reach its economic progress and a hope of wellness. A well-set mining governance framework aimed to the completion of concrete goals is a necessary condition for this to happen. Thank you very much. Mexico looks forward to hearing all your contributions on this important topic.
Perfect. Unfortunately, I've received messages from people who couldn't hear Mexico's intervention properly, and we do apologize for that. Actually, we're having some technical problems. However, we're going to sort these problems out for our coming meeting on the 23rd of July. Perfect. So we've listened now the participation of Mrs. Milan from the government of Mexico. Now we will get to listen the remarks of the ambassador to the government of Switzerland, Franz Berners.
In March 2019, the Fourth United Nations Environment Assembly has adopted a resolution on mineral resource management. Switzerland, together with Mexico, has sponsored this resolution. The adoption of that resolution was an important step because mineral resource management lies at the heart of sustainable development. Indeed, the extraction but also the use of mineral resources can pose a fundamental threat to the environment. Important economic interests are involved, and typically the poorest and socially most disadvantaged are the ones that suffer most from the unsound extraction of mineral resources. Therefore, it is important that the international community starts to address this challenge. A country can typically not solve individually that problem because there is always the risk of the race to the bottom because of competitive reasons. Therefore, international cooperation is needed. UNEP was requested to collect best practices, information about challenges and difficulties, and also to make an assessment about possible ways how to govern best the mineral resource extraction. This work is important. It will lead towards a report that can provide the basis for next decision at UNEA next year in 2021. I would like to thank all of you for engaging in that discussion, for providing your insight, your expertise and your knowledge about difficulties, about challenges, but also about best practices and success stories, so that UNEP can collect that information and that we, the governments of the world, then can come together next year and decide on the next step to make sure that the mineral resources will be used in future in a sustainable manner. Thank you very much.
Muy bien, perfecto. Hemos escuchado entonces las palabras del embajador Franz Perre, o Perre tal vez. Y bueno, antes de pasar a la sesión...
We've listened to the words of Ambassador Franz Perre, and before doing the briefing with the member countries, please allow me to remind you once more of some of the ground rules. Very simple rules. And I encourage you to take into consideration for your participation. I think we have a presentation right here. Well, microphones. Microphones should be muted. And it's important that participants mute your microphones, because that has an impact on the audio quality that we all have. The Q&A session will follow right after the next presentation. Right now we're going to have a more technical presentation, and later on we will open the floor for discussion and to entertain questions from participants. If you wish to pose a question whilst the presentation is on, please do that on the Kudo control panel, on that part where you can make questions. You can also adjust the size of the box with the with Control plus or Control less. That's the command that you can use.
We will be reading your questions right after the presentation. And as I've mentioned already, this is an on-the-record meeting, so we are recording it and it will be available on our website. And we would give you the address where you will be able to listen to the material. All what is discussed today and all our deliberations will be available on UNEP's website in the section pertaining to this resolution. I would like to invite Professor Daniel Franks, who will present to us the substantive content of the resolution and the roadmap to UNEA4, which will take place in February 2021. Professor Franks, the floor is yours.
Welcome everyone to this briefing of the United Nations Environment Assembly resolution on mineral resource governance. But in this session, I'm going to provide some more detail. My name is Daniel Franks. I'm a Professor of Governance and Leadership in Mining at the University of Queensland Sustainable Minerals Institute. The operative text of the United Nations Environment Assembly for Resolution on Mineral Resource Governance calls on UNEP to collect information on sustainable practices, identify knowledge gaps and options for implementation strategies, undertake an overview of existing assessments of different governance initiatives relating to the sustainable management of mineral resources, and report back to the United Nations Environment Assembly's 5th session, which will be held in early 2021. The resolution itself is built up on a number of foundational studies that UNEP has been conducting over the past few years. Those studies have broadened the role and the engagement of the United Nations system in mineral resource governance issues, and has been prompted by member states advocating for more active engagement on the topic. There's 3 main foundational studies that were integral to the resolution. The first is a 2019 report of the International Resources Panel, a body of the United Nations Environment Programme, on mineral resource governance in the 21st century, gearing extractive industries towards sustainable development. This report was released in 2019 as a summary report, and then later in 2020 released as a full report. That report is very comprehensive and overviews the myriad of different governance arrangements on different topics, different issues, in different regions and on different mineral commodities to try and achieve sustainable development. The study also calls for a range of different measures, cooperative measures that could be undertaken by member states at the international level. The second study is the 2019 study on sand and sustainability by UNEP Grid Geneva. This report talks about the very significant amount of sand and aggregate material that is mined every year, up to 40 billion tonnes per year. That has not currently been or historically been included in a lot of governance and regulation around mineral resources. There's very significant sustainable development challenges as a result of the unregulated extraction of sand, but also very significant economic contributions from that sector to both the miners involved in mining sand and the use of those sand and aggregates in infrastructure, in road building, in disaster reconstruction, and a myriad of other applications in the economy. The third foundational study was a 2017 report by UNEP Grid Arundel on mine tailings storage safety is no accident. This study came about following the Mariana tailings facility failure in Minas Gerais in Brazil in 2015. That was one of the most serious environmental incidents that has happened in the Southern Hemisphere. And a iron ore tailings facility of BHP and Vale collapsed and caused a large number of fatalities and very significant environmental challenges. Tailings facility failures happen with a regularity that is uncomfortable to the international community and member states, and also to the industry itself and many other advocacy organisations. And there has been an increasing energy and momentum for reform of tailings facility management and governance. As a result of this report, a roadmap was developed in 2018, and that roadmap laid out what a tailings reform agenda could look like. In 2019, in January 25th, a little after noon, another tailings facility failed in Minas Gerais in Brazil, resulting in the fatalities of more than 270 people and very significant environmental, social, economic, and financial damage. That facility led to calls from the investor community to develop an international tailings management standard, and also led to a very significant reform process whereby UNEP, the Principles on Responsible Investment, and the International Council on Mining and Metals came together to form the Global Tailings Review, develop an international standard, and that standard is due to be released soon. All those foundational studies were also accompanied by other work at the international level, such as the United Nations Development Programme's work on artisanal and small-scale mining and development minerals, and in particular the Mossy Otunya Declaration that was came together in 2018 on artisanal and small-scale mining, quarrying, and sustainable development. The key components of the implementation of the Mineral Resource Governance Resolution are as follows. We have developed a discussion paper that outlines the context for the resolution, the importance of the topic, and some existing knowledge about mineral resource governance, in particular, key findings from the studies that I just mentioned, but also sets up the questions that we're looking for discussion and consideration during the consultation process. Those questions I'll outline in a moment. The consultation process itself consists of 4 main types of consultation. The first are briefings with member states, such as the briefing that we're holding today. Second and third are sub-regional and regional level consultations, where we'll try and get into the detail of the consultation questions that we'd like to propose. And the fourth is a global consultation where we come together to share what has come out of the regional and sub-regional consultations. Because of COVID-19, we have moved to more virtual forms of consultation. We're holding more than 20 events around the world for each region. With that comes opportunities. We can reach more people than would have been possible in a live format, but it also comes with challenges in that the amount of consultation that we can fit into a virtual online format is much more difficult than face-to-face format. What we're doing to accompany that is to prepare accompanying materials, information, and other ways to discuss and digest and hear feedback about mineral resource governance. We have developed a podcast series that will be launched on Monday that will discuss key issues in mineral resource governance. We are accepting video submissions on key consultation questions, and Angela at the end of the presentation today will share with you how you can send your video submissions. We have a written submission process whereby member states and multi-stakeholder groups can write and submit their feedback on the consultation questions. And we also have a survey instrument where feedback can be gathered. All of these virtual forms will help to make the stakeholder process even more meaningful. Our virtual regional and sub-regional stakeholder consultations are multi-stakeholder. We want to hear the voices of all stakeholders involved in this process and have discussions that are meaningful across those different stakeholder groups. And finally, we'll bring all of this information together in a report to UNEA4, which will be held, as we said, early next year. The timeline for all of these elements is that we have, over the past few months, developed a discussion paper, a roadmap for the regional consultations. We've submitted that discussion paper for expert review, and we finalised it and then released it to you. You received the discussion paper in your introductory pack accompanying this session. We will be inviting multi-stakeholders to register for regional consultations shortly, and sub-regional consultations. Those consultations will be held throughout the rest of July and through August, and we will hold a global consultation in September, and then we will report back on the findings and outcomes of those consultations by around mid-September, drawing all of that material together for a report to UNEA4, a draft in October, and then a final report in November. The outcomes of our consultations essentially mirror the implementation request of the resolution itself. We want to support the resolution and develop a pathway going forward to UNEA4. The resolution essentially calls for information materials for member states to consider going forward, and what those information resources can help member states do is consider what forms of better cooperation around mineral resource governance and governance is needed. We want to assess what frameworks are working in different regions, which ones are not, what are the gaps, how do initiatives overlap, how do they complement each other, how do they hinder each other. We want to learn about best practices, and we want to consider all the different governance options that are available. So essentially the consultation will occur across 4 different groups of questions. I'm not going to go into the detail of those questions here. You will have this slide pack to dive into those. They're also a key part of the discussion paper, but I will outline the headlines of each of those 4 areas. We want to talk about what are the global trends in minerals and sustainable development. We want to understand how those trends are playing out across different regions, across different commodities, across different issues. We want to draw lessons from how you as member states and how other multi-stakeholder groups are experiencing the governance of mineral resources. 2, we want to discuss the findings of those foundational studies on mineral resources that I just shared with you. Those studies are available on our website, and also there are links in the discussion paper to them and an overview in the discussion paper of the main findings. And we want to hear from you about how relevant those findings are to your jurisdictional context and what we can learn from those findings going forward. 3, my slide's not changing. 3, we want to discuss what are the options for governance of mineral resources. What action can we undertake and in what form? And 4, what are the best practices that could inspire the next phase of sustainability in the extraction and use of minerals? And how relevant are those different best practices for our different regions? We will be inviting potential participants to become part of the regional consultations shortly. You as member states should already have received registration options for those consultations. We very much look forward to hearing your voice and the voice of the myriad of different stakeholders who want you to get involved. So please participate. If you've got any questions, please reach out. I'll now hand over back.
Bueno, perfecto. Entendemos que
we understand that the video of Professor Franks didn't have good sound quality. The quality of the sound was breaking up, and that's why I think it would be a little bit more efficient and logic to ask Professor Franks if he could very briefly now summarize the content of his presentation. Particularly, I think that the final part of his presentation was the most relevant one for the matters of this briefing session. So, Professor Franks.
As with a very short summary of your presentation, because the audio was not that good, and most of the people, they could not hear from you clearly. Okay. Good.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me now. Francesco, can you please confirm that that everything is fine?
I can hear
Great.
you well, yes.
Fantastic. So we decided to play a video of my presentation to make it more efficient. Also, I'm calling in and speaking with you from Australia. So it is about 2 a.m. in the morning here. So I think even though I'm tired, I'm going to be clearer than the video that we produced earlier. So thank you for your patience. and thank you for joining us this morning. We have a large number of member states on the call, I think more than 100 people. So we are very appreciative that you're able to be here with us. So let's move on, and despite the technical issues, there's a lot that we can share with you this morning. So I thought what I would do, given the video was breaking up a lot, is give you a very shortened version of what I presented. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to concentrate on the activities of the consultation process, which is the most important part of what we're doing. Essentially, we, with COVID-19, have had to move to virtual forms of consultation. With that comes the need for us to provide a lot more accompanying information, and to also have a lot more formats for people to interact with us. So there are four main components to the consultation process of the United Nations Environment Assembly Mineral Resource Governance Resolution. Those four components are: one, we have developed a discussion paper. The discussion paper summarizes the key issues and trends around mineral resource governance. It overviews the foundational work that the United Nations Environment Programme has undertaken on the topic, in particular the work of the International Resources Panel and their report on mineral resource governance, the work of GRID Arundel, which is a UNEP-related centre, and their work on tailings, and the work of GRID Geneva and their work on sand. These foundational studies are just part of the work that the United Nations Environment Programme has been doing in recent years. There's a whole suite of activities that include mercury, include disasters and conflict related to minerals. So there's a wide range of activities, but those three foundational studies were important to the adoption of the UNEA resolution. So we overview the findings of those studies in the discussion paper and distill some key questions and key issues that are in need of further consultation by member states and other stakeholders. The discussion paper also outlines the governance options and alternatives that are available to address mineral resource governance, the gaps that exist in the international system around those governance options, and outlines some best practices that are undertaken at the more operational level for achieving sustainable development from the extraction and use of minerals. The discussion paper then develops some key questions that are going to be part of the consultation. Those questions also mirror the operative text of the UNEA resolution. So that's element one, the discussion paper. That discussion paper has been shared with you. It is available in both Spanish and in English, and all of the other UN languages. The second thing that we're doing as part of the consultation process is we're holding briefings with member states, like this briefing we're holding with you. We are holding briefings in all of the UNEP regions of the world. And those briefings are to overview the process of the consultations and to invite you to encourage a wide group of stakeholders to be part of the sub-regional and regional consultations to follow. And we'll also hold a global forum. The next element of the engagement process are sub-regional and regional consultations. We're holding them for different geographies. There we will try and unearth information and answer those key questions that are outlined in the discussion paper. Essentially, the questions fall into a few different categories. One, trends on mineral resource governance. Two, specific feedback on those foundational studies that I mentioned. Three, the governance gaps and options and alternatives that are available. And four, what as an international community can we cooperate on to advance the mineral resource governance agenda? A lot of governance happens at the state level, obviously, and at regional and local levels.
the UNEA process is really about coming together to say, what can we as an international community do? Where is it best to cooperate on related to mineral resource governance? And then finally, we're going to have a kind of a global consultation as well once we've finished those regional, sub-regional and regional consultations. As we go up from sub-regional to global, we will summarize the findings from each of those consultations so that it's we progressively develop a body of knowledge over this process. We are also inviting written submissions. So written submissions can be received until the 28th of August. You have the email address for those written submissions will be provided by Angela at the end of this session. We have an online survey as well if you prefer to submit those written submissions through a survey instrument rather than through a short document. We will receive those submissions in Spanish and English and all of the UN languages. We have decided to also produce a lot of information materials. We have a podcast series which we would encourage you to listen to. That podcast series is already out and available. We can share a link for that series with you after this session. In the series, we're trying to talk about different topics of mineral resource governance. The first 2 episodes are already out. What is the UNEA resolution and why is it relevant to mineral resource governance? And 2, the second episode is on tailings and the tailings reform agenda. We'll have further episodes out soon on sand, artisanal and small-scale mining, etc., a whole host of different other topics. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it there. I'm happy to take your questions on the mineral resource governance resolution and the work that we're doing. The program or the timeline going forward is that we will hold these sub-regional and regional consultations from July through to August. We'll hold a global consultation in September. We hope to then produce a draft report to UNEA in October for submission in November. UNEA4 is planned still to be in March in 2021. Thank you for, again, for being with us on the call this morning. Apologies for the audio technical issues that we have experienced, but I'm glad to be here and happy to answer any of your questions. Francesco, the floor is yours to moderate any questions.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Daniel, Professor Franks. And yes, we got a very first question from the floor regarding the podcast. Can you just repeat the name of this podcast?
Yes, most definitely. It's called the Mineral Resource Governance Podcast. It is available on Spotify and iTunes. It is also available on SoundCloud. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send the links to that podcast to Francesco, and Francesco can distribute it to you all. Also, what I would do is after I finish speaking here, I'm going to post the links to that podcast in the chat function so that you'll be able to directly access it. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Then there is another question that is, I just want to recall you, oh, sorry, I'm speaking English. Quería acordar a los participantes.
I just wanted to remind today's participants that this briefing session has as an objective to clarify the process to instrument the resolution. Today, we're not going to delve into the content or the substance of the resolution. What we're going to do today is to address concerns and questions about the process of implementation of the resolution. For example, we have a question here, a pressing question and a timely one, which is there a date for the sub-regional and regional meetings? Yes. For sub-regional sessions, now the sound of the floor is cutting off. On July the 21st, this is next week, we're going to have a session, and we're going to have one more session for Spanish-speaking countries. For Brazil, for Latin American countries, on the 23rd of July. Then on August the 18th, we're going to hold a regional session with the participants from both subregions. Julia Keenan from the University of Queensland is already posting the information on the chat box. There are more questions here related to illegal mining, to informal mining. All these subject matters are fundamental. They are of utmost importance for many countries. But let me say this again. The idea is to have a conversation around the substantial topics during sub-regional and regional sessions. Today, we're going to cast some light on the roadmap towards the 5th session of UNEA4 that is going to take place in February 2021. We're also going to delve into the way in which the consultation process is going to take place. Do you have further support materials to back up the 4 groups of questions? We distributed a memo and what we call discussion paper. This is a succinct publication that is an introduction to the subject matter. There's enough material there for you to dig into more detail about this topic and to have a 360 vision on the resolution. Julia Keenan is posting something on the chat right now. She's putting up a link that is related to the resolution that both Mexico and Switzerland proposed on UNEA4 and which is being implemented right now. So you will find more information about this topic on that link. Later, we're going to listen to Angela and Hank about the different communication channels that countries and other stakeholders will have to share and communicate their questions and concerns, which are several. So this is not only the participation on the session per se, but there's another way of sharing information.
Very well. In order to give you all the information and to clear out any doubts, I would like to say that the invitations for sub-regional meetings have been sent already, have been sent to the focal points of the Latin American and the Caribbean Forum of Ministers of the Environment. Obviously, the ministries for the environment are essential in the topic of mining and mineral resource governance. There are other ministries, of course, and other sectors that revolve around the perimeter of governments that play an important role in this subject matter. The content of the invitation is this. The participation in sub-regional and regional consultations is of open nature. It is open to different stakeholders, including national governments representatives, subnational and local government representatives, including representatives from the academia, the public, the private sector, researchers, NGOs, and of course, civil society. Therefore, this will be a truly open consultation, open to multi-stakeholders playing a role or having a specific mandate in areas related to mineral resource governance. You can, of course, share this invitation with other stakeholders that you deem relevant for Spanish-speaking countries and Portuguese-speaking countries on the 21st for those countries that use English. The idea is to have a sub-regional consultation meeting aimed to share information regarding the resolution. And in that meeting, of course, we will ask for input. We will ask you to fill out a questionnaire. Angela will talk about that. We will ask for video submissions, and we will ask you to send written feedback. Of course, you can use email for that. The regional consultation will be oriented to getting feedback from the various sub-regions. And that feedback will be sent to UNEP. And this meeting will be used to share between different sub-regions, different countries, on common issues, on common topics, and the areas that should be discussed and that should be considered at a regional level. And that would be our preparation work for the global consultation process that will take place at the end of the year. All the input that will get to us will be processed, will be reflected in a set of documents. We will have a sub-regional document and we will have a separate regional document. Professor Franks and his team from the Queensland University, they will support UNEP in this process. And this input will be sent back to participating countries so they can approve the content of those documents that will be taken to a regional level and afterwards to a global level. UNEP, of course, will not be the only stakeholder or the only UN agency that will play a role of being the repository and being in charge of processing all the input being sent from governments and different stakeholders participating in this resolution. In the case of Latin America and the Caribbean, we are in contact and we have had several meetings with ECLAC, UNECLAC by its acronym in English. And of course, on their part, they will participate in this process. And they will make sure that every stakeholder playing an important role in the mining sector participate actively. When we heard Professor Franks present, be aware that we're working with global research centers, GRID Arendal and GRID Geneva, for addressing those topics related to sand extraction, for example, and also IRP, the International Resource Panel, which is a body based and sponsored by the UN. So before August the 28th, we would very much like to receive your input. And now Angela will talk more about this date and in the way you can send your input to us. In closing, Francesco.
Francesca, just before we do move to Angela, there were a couple of other questions in the chat box that I could probably answer here before we move on. There was a question about the engagement of the ministries of mining and minerals. And so it's worth clarifying here that the sub-regional, regional and global consultations are for all stakeholders. Certainly the UNEA process is a process that engages specifically the ministries of environment. And so this briefing, the invitation was sent to ministries of environment. We have been encouraging member states to invite their colleagues from other agencies to get involved. And we have also, through the broad general communication channels, inviting people to get involved in the sub-regional and regional consultations. We've been engaging with ministries of mining. So I would encourage all of you on this call, if you could reach out to your colleagues from the other line ministries and encourage them to get involved in the consultations, that would be very good. We had another question around invitations to the UNEA event in March of 2021. That event is an event that is organised by the United Nations Environment Assembly, and it's mainly for member states. So the invitation process and registration process for that will be run through official channels, and UNEA will run those. And thirdly, there was a question about what kind of scope is included for the discussion on mineral resource governance. And the scope that we're taking is relatively wide. We're talking about all mineral commodities, as in not oil and gas commodities, but commodities that are from minerals, which would include coal, for example, or uranium, but also largely includes construction materials and metals. We are talking about the extraction of those commodities. We're talking about the processing and the use of those commodities. It also obviously includes cross-border issues and trade issues. We are talking mainly about the sustainable development challenges of mineral governance. So even though our scope is wide, our focus is definitely more on the extraction side of the equation, even though those other issues are important and will be part of what we are consulting on. The substantive elements, the most important elements for impact on the environment happen at that extraction level and the environmental change around that. So to the extent that trade issues and use issues affect that, they'll be right front and center in the consultations. Thanks for your indulgence, Francesco, and just answering those last questions. I'm now happy to hand back to you for transferring to Angela.
Yes, sure. Thank you so much, Daniel. Y veo aquí hay todavía un poco de...
I believe that there are more questions related to Professor Frank's presentation. For example, best practices in the region. My suggestion is to read the attached document to the invitation, the concept paper. Specifically, please read the last portion of the paper. There are very interesting cases described there. I just got another question. This is about the documents that should be up in the platform. My colleagues were addressing this issue as well, and very, very soon all documents will be available on the platform. Very well. Having said that, we can move into the final section of today's briefing. I will give the floor to my colleague, Angela Karaoke from the Law Division from UNEP. And she will share it with us the ways in which you will be able to share your input and feedback.
Francesco. So we've now reached the closing of this briefing session, but before we end the consultation, we're very pleased to inform you of some additional information. So we've established a few platforms to continue receiving your feedback, as well as providing you with continuous updates on the process of implementing this resolution in the lead up to the 5th session of the Environment Assembly. So the first of these is a website that Francesco and Daniel already mentioned. So we've developed a webpage in partnership with the Green Growth Knowledge Platform, and the full website address is now displayed on the screen. So this website provides information on the process of implementing the resolution, as well as the materials that have been referred to throughout this briefing. We'd also very much welcome your feedback via a questionnaire that we have developed on a platform called Checkbox. And the purpose of this questionnaire is to request your feedback on certain key areas that we are responding to based on the resolution as well as on the discussion paper. Again, the link to this questionnaire or survey is displayed on the screen, and we're very happy to circulate these details to you via email. We know that there is a lot of information and a lot of inputs from state and non-state stakeholders on this resolution that will help us to report back to the 5th Environment Assembly and to inform our work on mineral resource governance going forward. So we'd therefore very much like you to make use of our video submission option. We invite you to record a short video of 2 to 3 minutes on your inputs to this process and to some of the key questions that are presented in the discussion paper, as well as in the survey. And you can send those videos to us via WeTransfer to the email address that has been set up to receive the submissions. The address is unea.mrg@ggkp.org, and it's also displayed on the screen. The webpage we've developed also contains all the foundational materials that Professor Franks referred to in his presentation. It also contains the resolution text and other reports. And as Francesco mentioned, we are continuously updating this webpage to upload all of the more recent documents in the various languages. And we'll also use the webpage as much as possible to publicize other materials, such as the podcast series that Professor Franks mentioned, which focuses on the content of the resolution, as well as the process of implementing it. Finally, if you have any feedback or any questions on any of the aspects that I've just presented, please feel free to contact us either on either of the email addresses that are displayed on the screen. We very much look forward to welcoming you to the sub-regional consultations, which will be convened on the 21st and the 23rd of July 2020 in English and in Spanish, respectively. My colleagues Francesco and Suzanne have been circulating these invitations as well as the links to register. And thank you very much for many of you who have already registered, and we invite more registrations for these consultations. And then we'll have the regional consultation, which will follow on the 18th of August 2020. So please don't forget to register using either the links or by sending an email to us at the GGKP address that I just mentioned, or visiting our webpage at www.greengrowthknowledgeplatform.org. Thanks again for your attention, and back over to you, Francesco.
Thank you very much, Angela. And I think now we are almost at the end of our very long session for today. And bueno, entonces voy a hablar.
So now I will speak in English once more. As Angela just mentioned, there are different communication channels available for you to receive your input and feedback. We're going to upload all the information on the website that has been mentioned repeatedly today. The survey is going to be in English. However, you will be able to fill in your answers in your own language. You can respond in Spanish in those questions that require for you to elaborate text reply. We're going to translate the content into English. This has been very interesting to hear your participation today. Unfortunately, we had some technical glitches, and we do apologize for that. For your information, the following sub-regional meetings will be held on a different platform. Probably, I'm not going to say that they are going to be smoother, but probably they are going to be different. And interpretation-wise, probably it might be smoother. I would also like to thank the interpreters, because in spite of all the technical glitches, they did a great job. I would also like to remind you that there are different ways of interacting with UNEP and with our technical team. Choose the language of your preference to reach out to us. You can even write your emails in Spanish without any problem. Likewise, the videos that you make, they can be in Spanish, and we will get them translated. So without further ado, I would like to thank you for your participation. Thank you for joining this briefing session. I wish you a good rest of the day, or for those of you who are in Australia, I think it's nearly time to get up again. See you soon. On the 21st of July, this is next week. For those friends and brothers and sisters from the Anglophone Caribbean region, and on the 23rd of July for Brazil and the Spanish-speaking countries from Latin America. Later on August 18th, we're going to have the regional session, and on the 28th of August, that is the deadline for the input and feedback submissions. Thank you very much again, and I wish you all a very nice rest of the day or a nice afternoon. Thank you, and see you soon.